The morning smelled of salt and new beginnings. I stood on my porch barefoot, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. The waves were somewhere beyond the dunes, their rhythm steady and low, the same rhythm that had calmed me through the chaos of packing boxes and long drives from the city. My new home looked small from the street, a pale gray cottage with blue shutters and a roof that had seen better years. Still, when sunlight touched the walls, they glowed like something alive. I had painted them myself 2 days ago. The brushstrokes were uneven, but each one felt like proof that I had built this piece with my own hands. Then the sound came. Engines, 2 of them, climbing the hill toward my street. At first I told myself it was a delivery truck or the mailman, but the closer they came, the clearer the sound became, familiar and heavy. My stomach tightened before I even saw them. My father's black SUV turned first onto the gravel, followed by Paul's silver sedan. The sight of those 2 cars parked side by side in front of my fence felt like the past pulling up in perfect formation. I did not move. The wind lifted the ends of my hair, brushing it against my cheeks as if nature itself was whispering, "Brace yourself." My mother stepped out first, smiling too widely for someone who had driven 3 hours without warning me. Her lipstick matched the roses blooming near the mailbox, and her eyes swept over the house with the kind of quick judgment she used at Sunday sales. "Sweetheart," she called out, "so this is it, your big adventure." Paul climbed out next, sunglasses on, phone in hand, his confidence too loud for the quiet street. My father closed the car door carefully and stood with one hand in his pocket, already surveying the porch like an appraiser. I pressed my lips together and whispered to myself, "Here we go." They walked up the path as if they had every right to be there. My mother opened her arms halfway for a hug, but when she saw I was holding the coffee cup and not moving, she dropped them again and smoothed her coat instead. "This is beautiful," she said brightly. "Smaller than I imagined, but cozy. It will be perfect once you add some color. You always had an eye for that." "Thanks," I replied, my tone flat but polite. "Want to come in?" They followed me inside. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and new wood polish. Sunlight fell through the window, drawing golden lines across the floor. I loved how the house breathed quietly, unlike the city apartments where every wall echoed with strangers. Paul set his sunglasses on the table and glanced around. "You bought this place by yourself?" "Yes." He gave a low whistle. "Guest design really pays off." There was a pause, the kind that fills a room before the real reason for a visit finally shows itself. My mother looked at my father, who nodded as if granting permission. She clasped her hands and said, "We actually came to talk about something exciting. Paul has found a wonderful property north of here. It is the kind of home a family can grow in. We thought you might want to be part of it." I leaned against the counter. "Part of it how?" My father spoke this time, calm and measured. "The bank will approve the mortgage easily if your name is on it. You have stable income and good credit. Once it goes through, Paul and Heather can move in with the kids and we can all help with payments. It is a smart investment, a family project." I watched their faces as they spoke. None of them saw the house I had built, the quiet that held me together. They saw a solution, a resource, a signature waiting to be used. Paul smiled, rehearsed and eager. "It would not even affect you. I will take care of the monthly payments. You just have to lend your name for the paperwork." My voice came out steady, though my pulse was loud in my ears. "What happens when the payments stop?" He laughed softly. "You think so little of me?" "I think realistically." My mother's smile wavered. "Colette, please, you know your brother is doing his best. After everything we have done for you, we only ask this one favor." Something inside me cracked, not loud but definite, like a hairline fracture in glass. "Everything you have done for me," I repeated. "You mean when you used my college fund to pay his tuition, or when you emptied my savings for his business idea?" My mother's lips parted, shock flashing across her face. My father looked away. Paul sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You never let anything go, do you?" I stared at him. "That is because you never stop taking." The words hung there, heavier than I expected. For a moment, none of them spoke. The air in the small kitchen thickened with everything we had never said. Finally, my mother took a step forward. "We are a family, Colette. Families help each other." "No," I said quietly, "families respect each other." Outside, a gull cried over the sea, sharp and lonely. It felt like the sound cut right through the air between us. Her face stiffened, the practiced warmth draining away like paint in the rain. "You have no idea how hard it has been for us," she said. "Your father is near retirement, Paul has 3 children to feed, and we have all sacrificed so you could have this career, this freedom." I set my cup on the table and looked at her, really looked. "Sacrificed? You took my tuition savings without asking and called it family support. I worked 2 jobs to stay in school while Paul dropped out to chase another dream. You told me I was strong, that I could handle it. Maybe you were right, because I survived it all alone." Paul's voice snapped. "You think you're better than us just because you bought a house? You're still part of this family whether you like it or not." I almost smiled. "That's the problem, Paul. You think family means ownership." My father cleared his throat, his voice low, diplomatic. "Let's not turn this into a fight. We are trying to build something together." "Build?" I echoed. "No, you're trying to build on me." The silence that followed was sharp, like glass ready to break. I could see the storm forming in my mother's eyes, but this time I didn't flinch. She folded her arms. "You have become selfish." I nodded. "Finally." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Paul stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "Fine, do whatever you want, but don't come crying when you realize you've got no one left." He stormed out, slamming the screen door behind him. The sound startled a bird from the porch railing, wings fluttering into the gray sky. My father followed without a word, his steps heavy on the old boards. My mother stayed. Her eyes darted around the small living room as if looking for evidence of my mistake. She reached for a framed photograph on the shelf, one of me standing with my coworkers, smiling, holding a small award from the firm. She set it down slowly. "All this," she said, "you think it means you don't need anyone, but one day you'll see how empty it feels when there's no family left." I answered softly. "I already felt that emptiness years ago when I was surrounded by you." Her mouth trembled. For the first time, she looked unsure of herself. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said, not cruelly, just honestly. "And maybe that's what hurts you most, that I finally do mean what I say." Her hands fidgeted with the buttons of her coat. "You always twist my words. You always make me the villain." "I don't need a villain, Mom. I just need space." The porch creaked under her weight as she turned toward the door. I followed her outside. The wind had shifted, bringing the scent of rain and salt. The ocean was hidden behind a line of dunes, but I could hear it, steady, endless, free. She stopped at the steps and looked back at me. "You'll regret this, Colette." I shook my head. "I already regret every time I said yes when I wanted to say no." She blinked, almost as if the words stung her, then walked to the car. The engine started, tires crunching over gravel, fading down the road until all I could hear was the sea again. I stood there for a long time, letting the wind push against me. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from release. The air felt cleaner now, sharper. Inside, the house greeted me with silence. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, breathing in the scent of lemon and wood. For years, I had wanted a place that was mine, but I hadn't realized that owning a house wasn't just about money. It was about permission. The permission to lock the door without guilt. I walked from room to room, touching the edges of windows, the smooth surface of the kitchen counter, the cool metal of the sink. Every detail felt alive. Every echo was mine. I thought of the years I had spent in cramped apartments where I could hear other people's arguments through thin walls, where my dreams were small enough to fit into a single drawer. Now I had space to breathe, to make mistakes, to rest without apology. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and watched the light fade through the curtains. The quiet hummed softly in my ears, like the ocean whispering behind the dunes. A strange thought came to me, that this peace was fragile, like a shell that could break if I invited the wrong voices back in. But I also knew that silence, once chosen, becomes strength. That night, I made dinner from what I had left: pasta, a handful of herbs, a little olive oil. I ate at the small wooden table, the candlelight flickering across the walls. Outside, the wind grew louder, and I imagined it carrying away every piece of guilt I had been raised to carry. When the clock reached midnight, I walked to the door again, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch. The sky was black velvet, the air damp with salt. I could barely see the ocean, but I could feel it. I whispered to the night, to no one, and to everything. "This time the door closes for me, not against me." The sea answered with a long breath of wind that wrapped around me like a promise. I smiled, small and tired but real. Then I went back inside and closed the door. This time, it stayed closed. The rain began before sunrise, soft at first, then steady, the kind that seeps into the soil and stays there. I woke to the sound of water tapping on the roof and the faint smell of damp wood. The cottage felt older in the rain, its walls creaking like an old body stretching after sleep. I liked it. It made me feel less alone. I brewed coffee and sat on the floor beside the window, watching the glass fog with every breath. The silence inside was a small miracle. No footsteps above, no doors slamming, no voices rising in rooms that never belonged to me, only the wind, the rain, and the steady hum of the kettle cooling. After breakfast, I decided to clean the living room. I lifted the rug to sweep underneath and noticed a loose floorboard near the corner. At first I thought it was nothing, but when I pressed my foot down, it shifted slightly, a hollow sound echoing beneath it. Curiosity pulled stronger than reason. I knelt, pried it open, and found a small gap filled with dust, spiderwebs, and something wrapped in an old piece of cloth. Inside was a photograph, edges curled, colors fading to brown. A family stood in front of the same house decades ago, a man in suspenders, a woman in a long dress, 2 children gripping her skirt. Behind them, the same porch railing, the same crooked mailbox. I brushed the dust away, smiling at how proud they looked. Then I saw something else. Scribbled on the back in faint pencil were 3 words: "Keep this safe." For a moment I felt a chill crawl up my arms. Maybe it was the draft through the open board, or maybe it was the strange weight of being part of this house's memory. Whoever hid this photo must have wanted it to stay unseen, and somehow I had found it. I placed the picture on the table and closed the board again. The sound it made, wood settling back into wood, reminded me of my mother's voice telling me to leave things as they are. I wondered if that rule had always been about control, not respect. The rain turned heavier, blurring the windows. I wrapped myself in a sweater and sat near the fireplace, letting my thoughts wander back to Spokane. To the small house where my brother's laughter filled every space and my achievements filled none. I used to believe silence was a kind of strength. When they forgot my birthday in high school because Paul had a soccer game, I didn't cry. When they used my scholarship fund, I didn't shout. I told myself that quiet endurance was maturity, that good daughters endured without making a scene. But silence had a price. It taught everyone around me that I could carry endless weight. I remember one winter afternoon when I was 16. Snow had covered the porch, and I was shoveling while Paul played video games inside. My father came out and said, "You're strong like your grandfather. He never complained either." I smiled at the time, proud of the comparison. Years later, I realized what that praise really meant: you will work while others rest, and we will call it virtue. I took another sip of coffee, bitterness cooling on my tongue. The old floorboard creaked again under my foot, as if reminding me that even houses remember what's been buried beneath them. Around noon, I decided to walk to the small market at the end of the street. The rain had eased to a mist. The road smelled of wet pine and salt. A woman in a yellow raincoat was sweeping water off her porch. When she saw me, she waved. "You must be the new neighbor. I'm June from across the lane." Her voice was warm, and something in her face, the lines around her eyes, the easy curiosity, reminded me of the teachers who used to notice me when my own family didn't. We spoke briefly about the weather, about how the power sometimes flickered during heavy storms. She asked what I did for a living. "I design interiors," I said. "Mostly freelance now." June smiled. "Then this old cottage is lucky. Someone finally moved in who sees what it can be." Her words stayed with me all the way back home. Maybe the house really was lucky, or maybe I was. For once, I had a space where no one expected me to give anything more than what I chose to. That evening, while drying my coat near the heater, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from an unknown address titled Mortgage Pre-Approval Confirmation. My stomach tightened. I opened it. The message congratulated me for submitting a housing application for a property in North Ashford. The amount listed was enormous. My name was written at the top, along with my social security number and employer details. I froze. There had to be a mistake. I read it twice, then a third time. At the bottom was a note: "Please contact your co-applicant, Paul Watts, to finalize signature verification." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the rain outside. My pulse quickened. The letter wasn't an error. Paul had used my information again. But as I scrolled down to the attached form, something caught my eye: the electronic signature field already filled in, written in a looping cursive that wasn't his. It was hers, my mother's handwriting. The coffee in my stomach turned cold. I sat on the floor, staring at the screen until the light dimmed and went black. I stayed on the floor a long time, phone face down beside me, the screen a dark mirror that kept reflecting the ceiling beams. I listened to the house breathe. Pipes ticked somewhere in the walls. Rain traced soft paths down the gutters. The quiet had always felt like safety to me, but now it felt like a question. "What are you going to do, Colette?" I picked up the phone and read the email again. The same numbers, the same address, the same final sentence inviting me to celebrate my approval. I clicked the contact number and called the mortgage office. A woman answered with a bright greeting that sounded like sunlight through glass. I gave my name, then my date of birth, then asked her to read back the co-applicant on the file. She said the name in a cheerful tone as if she were offering me a free gift. I asked when the application was submitted. She told me yesterday afternoon, shortly after 3. My mouth tasted like the inside of a coin. I told her I had not authorized any application. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. She said we could put a hold on the process and flag the file for internal review. She asked if the electronic signature was mine. I told her it was not. She asked if I knew the co-applicant. The question floated for a moment, then I said yes, he is my brother. She was quiet for half a breath, then switched to a tone I recognized from city offices and urgent favors. She began to list the steps. Fraud alert on my credit, a freeze with the bureaus, a police report if needed, and a visit to the bank with identification to document the dispute. She promised to send a summary to my email. When I hung up, the rain had slowed to a whisper. I stood and walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and drank it in 3 long swallows. My hands were steady now. Fear had turned into something else. Not anger, not yet. Something cleaner. A line drawn in the sand. I brought the photograph from beneath the floorboard back to the table and looked at the family again. The woman in the long dress had an expression I could not name. It was not joy exactly. Not sadness either. It looked like resolve. The pencil note on the back felt different now. Keep this safe. I wondered what she had been trying to keep safe. A memory, a promise, herself. I fetched a small tin box from my suitcase and opened it. Inside were things I always kept close. A spare key. A thin silver necklace I had bought with my first paycheck. A folded list of goals I had written 5 years ago on a subway train while a stranger sang a love song off-key. I slid the old photograph into the box and closed the lid with a soft click. Some things deserved a home inside a home. My phone buzzed. A message from Paul lit the screen. It was short. Call me. Then another arrived, this one from my mother. We need to talk. Neither used my name. Neither said please. I set the phone face down again and watched the light on the wall shift as the clouds moved. The cottage smelled faintly of damp rope and cedar. I opened a window a few inches. The air that entered felt honest. It carried no expectations. June knocked on the door just after 4. She wore a soft sweater that looked hand-knit and held a round tin that smelled like vanilla. I invited her in and she walked straight to the window as if she liked to find the brightest part of every room. She asked if I had settled well. I said yes, mostly. Then I surprised myself by adding, I am still learning how to be unafraid when my phone rings. June did not ask for details. She just nodded like someone who knew about phone calls that changed the weather inside a person. She set the tin on the counter and said the cookies were a welcome to the neighborhood. She said she used to bake them for her daughter when storms scared her. She smiled. They taste like calm, or so I was told. We ate 2 each with tea. Crumbs gathered on the napkins like small islands. I asked about the family who owned the cottage before me. June said the house had passed through quiet hands. She remembered an older couple who planted morning glories along the fence and a young teacher who wrote poems in the evening with her windows open. She said every owner was different, but the house never lost its gentleness. Before she left, she touched the doorframe and said softly, "Some places choose you back." Then she slipped on her shoes and went out into the washed light of late afternoon. After she was gone, I sat at the table and read the email from the mortgage office again. Then I opened a new document and began to write a list. It was not a dramatic list. No speeches, no declarations. Simple sentences lined up like stepping stones across a dark stream. Call the credit bureaus and place a freeze. Contact the bank and request documentation of the electronic signature. File an identity theft affidavit if necessary. Ask the mortgage office for time-stamped IP records. Change all passwords. Do not answer Paul until the holds are in place. When ready, call Mother from the porch with the sea within earshot. I called the bureaus. A recorded voice guided me through the steps as if we were both crossing a field at dusk. I lifted the phone to my ear and gave every number and detail required. I put a lock on what could be taken. The last confirmation tone sounded like a door closing with a firm, clean click. When it was done, I went to the living room and lifted the rug again. The loose floorboard waited. I pried it up and looked into the hollow. It was empty now, but the space itself felt like a secret. I thought of all the things we hide in families, the unasked questions, the unreturned birthdays, the stories told so many times they stop being true and start being useful. I pressed the board back into place. The wood settled like a sigh. The phone buzzed again. Paul this time, and he kept trying. The messages stacked one after another. It is just paperwork. The bank needs your name. You are making this dramatic. You will be thanked properly when we close. The last one arrived with a small cruelty at the end. Do not make Mom cry over nothing. I stared at the words until they blurred. I tried to picture him typing them, his jaw set, his certainty complete, a man convinced he was owed. Then I did something I had never done. I deleted his messages without reading the rest. The space they left on the screen felt like clean air. Dusk came early. The rain had rinsed the world and the sky was the soft gray of a pearl. I turned on a lamp and the room warmed to honey. I pulled a notebook from the shelf and began to sketch ideas for the cottage. Nothing big, new shelves near the kitchen window, a longer table for nights when I might not be alone, a coat of paint in the bedroom the color of a distant horizon. Changes that honored what the cottage already was. The phone rang, not a message this time, a call. I glanced at the screen. My mother. The name drew a line down my spine. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, I answered and pressed the speaker on, set the phone on the table, and opened the window a little wider so the sound of the sea could be our witness. Her voice arrived already tired. We did not mean to scare you. Your brother needs help. Families help, you know this. I kept my tone quiet. You signed my name, a pause, then a soft inhale. We signed for the appointment. It is not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing, I said. You used my identity because it was convenient. You did not ask because you knew I would say no. She spoke my name as if it were proof of love. Colette, we raised you. We believed in you. We bragged about you to everyone. You are strong. If you do this, you will hold us together. The wind came through the window with a cool hand and touched the back of my neck. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I said, I am done holding everyone together. I am choosing not to break. She did not speak. I heard the faint echo of a television somewhere in her house, then the creak of a chair. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. Your brother has 3 children. He has 3 children and 2 living parents and a wide circle of friends, I said. He has many people. I have me. There was a long silence. Then she said the sentence that had strung me like wire for years. You make me out to be the villain. I opened my eyes and looked at the doorway to the hall, at the lamp glow touching the frame, at the empty space that felt safer than any apology. I do not need a villain, I said. I need you to stop using me like a solution you never paid for. The line stayed open. I heard her breathe. I imagined her sitting at the kitchen table with the floral placemats, the same ones from my childhood. I imagined the way she would rub her thumb along the edge of her cup when she was thinking of a response that would cost her nothing. When she spoke again, the sentence was different. We did not know how to love you, she said. You did not need us the way Paul did. We told ourselves that was a good thing. It landed like a stone in a still pond. Rings of sound widened through me. I wanted to say many things. I wanted to talk about birthdays and graduations and the night I slept on a bus between cities because there was no money for a room. But the sea outside was steady and kind, and I decided to stand where I was. I said, now you do know, so do not ask me to undo it. She exhaled. The sound was older than her words. Keep the house, she said. Do what you want. Then the line clicked and the call ended, not angrily, not tenderly, just finished. I stood with my hands on the table for a while, elbows warm from the lamp. The cottage seemed to listen with me. The light flickered as if the house were breathing a little deeper. I put the phone away and pulled the rug flat again. The loose board did not move. I thought of the woman in the photo and her careful pencil. Keep this safe. I understood her better now. Safety is not only locks and alarms, it is also boundaries. It is also the word no said with an open heart. I washed the teacups and set them to dry. The small clink of porcelain felt like a bell calling the day to order. Hunger arrived like a gentle knock, so I cooked rice and eggs and sliced tomatoes. I ate slowly, letting each bite mean more than food. It meant I was here. It meant the storm had passed without taking me with it. Night drew its dark shawl over the town. I went to the bedroom and turned on the lamp with the woven shade. The light braided itself across the walls in soft lines. I changed the sheets and smoothed my palm over the cotton. Then I sat at the edge of the bed and wrote a few lines in my notebook. Today I chose not to be borrowed. Today I learned that silence can be courage if it protects truth. Tomorrow I will go to the bank. Tomorrow I will buy mint for the window. I closed the book and placed it on the nightstand. Before I turned off the lamp, I looked toward the door to the hall. It stood open, dark, and plain. So much of my life had been lived for a door that could open without warning. This one would open when I wanted it to, and that difference felt like a kind of prayer. I lay down and listened to the rain return for a final visit, soft as fingertips on a drum. The ocean answered from far away. The sound of the two together was a lullaby for people who had learned most of their songs by surviving. As sleep approached, I pictured the photo in the tin box and the family who once stood where I stand. I hoped someone had kept them safe. I hoped the woman in the long dress had found a way to be heard in her own kitchen. I turned off the lamp. The cottage settled around me, warm and sure. Under the floorboards, secrets finally had room to breathe. Above them, so did I in the quiet between the last rain and sleep. I said the words aloud so the house would know them. This is mine. My name, my work, my home. The room answered with silence that felt like yes. Morning sunlight spilled through the window like it had been waiting all night to be let in. The air was still cool from the rain, smelling faintly of wet leaves and salt. I stood in the middle of the living room with a paintbrush in my hand, staring at the half-finished wall. The color was soft gray, almost silver, the shade I once imagined for a home I might never have. I dipped the brush again, dragging long strokes across the plaster. The bristles whispered against the surface, and every line felt like an act of repair. Not just for the wall, but for me. Paint, breathe, a rhythm that asked for nothing but presence. When the sun hit the wet paint, it gleamed faintly, and for a moment I thought about the phrase fresh start. It used to sound like a commercial promise, too bright and too clean. Now I realized fresh starts were quieter. They began with small choices, like refusing a phone call or saying no without explanation. I set the brush down, wiped my hands, and looked around the room. The boxes were almost gone. My books stacked neatly on the shelves, the small lamp from my old apartment casting a warm pool of light at night. There was still work to do, curtains to hang, a rug to flat, but the house was starting to look less like a stranger and more like a reflection. A knock sounded on the door, light but steady. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and opened it. June stood there again, holding a basket. "Morning, dear. I brought you something for the wall," she said, smiling as if she already knew I was painting. Inside the basket were seashells, small pieces of driftwood, and a glass jar of sand. "Decoration from the shore," she added. "The sea always gives back what we let go." I laughed softly. "You make it sound like poetry," she winked. "Maybe it is, maybe life just likes good metaphors." I invited her in. She looked around approvingly, touching the frame of the window. "You're making this place beautiful. I can tell it's loved." "Thank you," I said. "It feels different, like the house breathes better." She nodded. "Houses do that. They hold on to what we put inside them: joy, fear, even silence. Be careful what you keep." Her words lingered after she left. I stood by the window, watching her cross the street, and felt the truth in what she said. This house was learning me, and I was learning it. I wondered what kind of energy the last owner had left behind. When the clock reached 10, I changed clothes and took the folder of documents to the bank downtown. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. The clerk at the front desk smiled politely and led me to a cubicle lined with neutral blue walls. A man with silver hair and square glasses greeted me. "Ms. Watts, I understand there's an issue with a mortgage application?" "Yes," I said. "An application I didn't make." He typed something on his keyboard, the screen reflecting in his glasses. "We have a file under your name and signature. Co-applicant Paul Watts." I took a deep breath. "That signature isn't mine." He hesitated, then turned the monitor toward me. There it was, my name, written in neat loops, but the handwriting wasn't mine. It was hers again, my mother. The man cleared his throat. "Would you like to file a formal affidavit of fraud?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Please." He printed the forms, the paper sliding out of the machine with mechanical calm. As I signed my own real name at the bottom, I felt something shift. I had spent years being the quiet one, the reasonable one, the daughter who never made scenes. But the ink on that page was my line in the sand. After the paperwork was done, I walked outside. The sky was pale blue, the wind cool on my face. Across the street, a bakery smelled like sugar and butter. I went inside and bought a croissant, still warm from the oven. Sitting by the window, I tore it open and watched the steam rise. For the first time in weeks, I tasted sweetness without guilt. Outside, people hurried past with umbrellas and paper cups, each carrying their own unseen stories. I wondered how many of them were also learning to stop apologizing for existing. When I finished, I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from my mother, 1 from Paul. I deleted them without opening. Then I turned the phone off completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was clean. I walked back home with the bag of shells and the jar of sand. On the porch, I placed them by the window where the light was softest. The sand sparkled faintly, a reminder that even broken things, glass, shells, hearts, can shine if you give them enough sun. That night, I sat on the floor again, sketchbook open. I drew the outline of my house, each room labeled not with furniture but with words. Peace in the bedroom, clarity in the kitchen, freedom on the porch. When I finished, I stared at the page and realized this was what I had been designing all along, not a house, but a life that finally fit me. Outside, The sea murmured softly. The sound reached through the windows like a promise that the past could fade, grain by grain, until only what mattered remained. Late afternoon put a soft gold on everything it touched. Dust lifted in the light like glitter that had nowhere else to go. I opened the windows and let the sea air pass from one room to the next, a slow river of salt and coolness. The house felt awake, as if it had been waiting all day for this exact hour. I took the jar of sand June had given me and poured a thin line along the bottom of a wide glass vase, then tucked the shells on top. The smallest one looked like a curled ear. I set the vase on the sill where the sun was easiest, and for a long moment I just watched light gathering in the glass. I remembered how in the city I used to keep everything inside drawers. Beauty was something I deferred for later. Here, beauty had moved into the open. A soft knock came at the door. It was not June. It was the delivery driver from the hardware store, a tall man with kind eyes and a clipboard. He handed me a narrow box with my name neatly printed on the label. The glass cut I had ordered for the cracked kitchen window had arrived earlier than expected. He tipped his cap and left me standing there with the box like a child on a holiday morning. I set it on the table and cleared the tools I had gathered over the weekend. Measuring tape, putty knife, small nails, the old chisel I found in the shed. I eased the frame free, careful with the fractured pane, and lifted it onto the cloth I had spread. The crack had grown in a delicate branch from the last storm, a thin line that spidered to the corner. It had let in a whisper of cold. It had also let in a song. I worked slowly. I lifted the broken glass away and rested it on the floor. I scraped old putty from the wood, a crumbly work that left white curls at my feet. When I pressed the new pane into place, it seated itself with a clean sound that satisfied something in my chest. I sealed the edges with fresh putty, then stepped back and waited for the haze to soften. The window, newly whole, accepted the sky without resistance. Cement and glass, I thought. The cottage was a simple lesson in both, the things that hold and the things that reveal. I had spent so many years trying to be one when I was mostly the other. Everyone wanted me to be cement. I wanted to be glass that no one could mistake for a door. My phone vibrated on the counter. I glanced at the screen, an email from the mortgage office. I opened it and found the promise summary. The hold had been placed. The co-applicant field was now blank. There was a second file attached, a record of the electronic signature and the time stamp. I scrolled through the data that looked boring to anyone who had never been made into paperwork. Then I saw the line that made the room tilt slightly. The submission location was not a bank branch at all. It was a home address. My childhood street. The house where my mother still kept the floral placemats and the sugar bowl shaped like a strawberry. The file said the signature was logged at 3:14 in the afternoon from a kitchen table that I knew by the sound of its wobble. For a while, there was only the refrigerator hum and the slow percussion of my own heart. I set the phone down very carefully, as if it contained a bird I did not want to startle. I looked through the new glass. The world beyond it was the same as it had been 2 minutes earlier, but the air inside me had changed its shape. I walked to the sink and ran cool water over my wrists. I thought of the sketch I had made the night before, the one where I had labeled the rooms with words instead of things. I stood in the doorway and tried to sense the word that belonged to the kitchen. Strength did not fit. Victory did not either. The one that came was steadiness. The kind you build with repeated motion. The kind you feel in your forearms after kneading dough. The kind that lets you hold a truth without having to turn it into a weapon. I called June then, not to report anything, only to ask if she had a spare ladder. She said of course, and that she would bring it to me, although she teased that I was not allowed to fall off it until she had shown me where to place my feet. When she arrived, we carried the ladder into the bedroom and laughed at ourselves as if we had been doing this for years. She steadied the base while I measured the upper crown for a curtain rod. We worked without hurry. At one point, she looked up at me and asked if the window had been replaced. I told her yes. She said it looked like clarity. After she left, I made tea and stood beside the fresh pane with the mug cupped in both hands. I kept expecting a surge of outrage to arrive, the kind that drains the body and makes the throat burn. It did not come. What came instead was a careful decision, like a stone placed on a path so the next step would be sure. I opened my laptop and wrote a short post for the blog I had abandoned in the city. I wrote about repairing a window. I wrote about how putty gives before it hardens, how it can be shaped with patience, how it needs time to cure. I did not mention my mother. I did not mention Paul. Anyone who had lived inside a story like mine would understand the code. The comments began to gather from strangers with familiar hearts. A woman wrote that she had been cement for 20 years and had forgotten she was also glass. A man wrote that he had learned to say no, and his voice still shook, but at least now it was his. I liked their words and closed the laptop with a feeling that something in the world had nodded back. Near evening, I drove to the nursery on the edge of town, where the gravel lot smelled like earth and coffee. I bought 2 mint starters and a rosemary bush that looked like a small green lighthouse. The woman at the register drew a small sun on my receipt. She said the rosemary would guard doorways. I wondered briefly what it would guard me from. Then I decided it did not matter. Not everything had to be a defense. Some things could simply be green. Back home, I tucked the mint into a wide clay pot under the kitchen window. I pressed the soil around it and watered until the dark loam shone. The scent rose at once, bright and clean. I brushed my fingers against the leaves and brought them to my face. The fragrance was a memory of mornings that had not happened yet. I cooked dinner with the new herb. Pasta again, but this time with lemon and rosemary, and a small salad with tomatoes that tasted more like sunlight than fruit. I ate on the porch while the sky softened into evening. Across the lane, a child laughed at something only children see. A couple walked a slow dog who wagged as if the day were applauding. Someone began a radio in a kitchen with a song so gentle I wanted to frame it. I washed dishes by hand and let them dry without wiping them. Their small circles of water evaporated into nothing without my help. I thought of all the effort I had once spent trying to speed the disappearance of every mark life left on me. Now I let small marks remain. They proved I had been here. The phone lay face down on the counter, quiet and obedient. I picked it up and opened a new message to my mother. I stared at the blank screen for a minute and then wrote 4 sentences. I told her the hold was in place. I told her I would not sign anything now or later. I told her I knew where the application had been submitted. I told her I would speak with her in person when I was ready and not before. I read the words twice and sent them. The sound the phone made when the message left felt final without feeling cruel. Night pressed its shoulders against the windows. I turned off the main lights and left the small lamp glowing near the repaired pane. The glass reflected a version of me I was still getting to know. Not the girl who swallowed pain to keep the room pleasant. Not the woman who hid her skill because celebration would raise a debt. Someone else. Someone with soil under her nails and a steady back. Someone who knew what her name meant when she wrote it down. Before bed, I went to the living room and rolled the rug back one more time. I knelt and touched the loose board and felt the quiet energy beneath it, like a secret that had finally decided to sleep. I did not lift it. There was nothing I needed to find tonight. I set the rug flat and smoothed it with both palms. The fabric warmed under my hands as if the house were grateful for the attention. I turned out the lights. The cottage settled with the soft creaks that I had already memorized. In the bedroom, I opened the window 2 inches. The air that entered smelled of cold tide and pine needles. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the water moved with the same confidence it had kept since before anyone put names on anything. I climbed into bed and lay on my side. I placed one hand beneath my cheek and one hand on my ribs like I was reminding my body it was home. I breathed in for 4 and out for 6 until my thoughts slowed to a reasonable conversation. Cement holds what matters in place. Glass lets the light through so you remember why it matters at all. I slept. And the house stood watch, a quiet witness with a new window that did not leak and a woman inside who finally did not either. The next morning began with the sound of gulls fighting over something invisible beyond the dunes. Their cries cut through the quiet like torn paper. I boiled water for coffee and watched steam curl in the air. The kitchen light hit the new glass perfectly, catching every reflection and scattering it across the counter. The pane had no cracks now, yet I could still feel where it had once been weak. I sat at the table, phone in hand, rereading my message from the night before. No reply, no apology, just silence thick and familiar. My mother had always treated silence as a weapon. I was learning to use it as armor. By noon, I decided to drive to Spokane. I told myself it was for closure, though deep down I knew closure was only a story people told when they were tired of pain. Still, the thought of unfinished business made my chest feel heavy, so I packed a small bag and left. The highway stretched ahead like a long gray memory. The rain had stopped, leaving the road shiny and full of mirages. I played music softly, something instrumental, something without words that could betray me. Each mile felt like an old scar being traced. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the same birch tree still leaned slightly toward the porch, its roots buckling the concrete path. The house looked smaller now, as if time had taken little bites out of it. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. "You came," she said, voice caught between surprise and relief. Inside, the air smelled of lemon cleaner and old carpets. The kitchen light buzzed faintly. My father sat at the table, reading something on his tablet. He didn't look up. Paul wasn't there, not yet. My mother gestured for me to sit. "We should talk calmly," she began. "I am calm," I said. She folded her hands. "You embarrassed your brother at the bank." I almost laughed. "He used my name to take out a loan." "It was supposed to be temporary," she said quickly. "He was going to fix it once the deal went through." "The deal?" I asked. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. "The house. The one he found. It's beautiful, Colette. It has a yard for the kids, a basement you could use as a studio. You could have a space there too." "I already have a space," I said softly. "That's why I bought my own house." She sighed. "You're too focused on yourself. We all share blood, that means something." "It means responsibility," I said, "not ownership." Before she could reply, the door opened and Paul walked in, tie loosened, expression tired but confident. "So this is what it takes for you to visit," he said. "Congratulations," I said. "You've officially committed fraud." He smirked, though his eyes flickered with unease. "Don't be dramatic. The bank knows it's a family matter. They said as long as the payments start soon, they'll overlook it." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You think legality bends for sentiment?" He dropped into a chair. "You're overreacting. Mom and Dad helped with the deposit. We were going to handle everything." "By we, you mean me," I said. He stared at me. "You have the best credit. You have no kids, no debt. Why shouldn't you help?" I leaned forward. "Because help stops being help when it hurts." The room fell silent. Even my father's tablet went dark, as if the house itself was holding its breath. My mother tried again, voice trembling. "He's your brother. He's had a hard life." I laughed softly. "So have I just didn't make everyone pay for it." Paul stood, hands curling into fists at his sides. "You think you're better than us because you ran away and bought yourself a cottage?" I met his eyes. "No, I think I'm finally equal." He scoffed, stepping closer. "You've changed. You used to care." "I used to comply," I said. The sound of the refrigerator humming filled the space between us. My mother looked like she wanted to speak but couldn't decide which of us needed saving. My father still hadn't looked up. I reached into my bag, pulled out the printed report from the mortgage office and laid it on the table. "Here's the timestamp, the IP address, and the name that submitted it. You didn't just cross a line. You dug it up and tried to bury me under it." Paul's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "From the bank," I said. "The people who actually believe in written consent." He reached for the paper, but I slid it back. "Don't touch it," my mother whispered. "Colette, please." I looked at her and said, "I am done being the family credit score." Her mouth fell open, but no words came. My father finally looked up. His eyes were tired, not cruel, just distant, like someone watching a storm he couldn't stop. "Enough," he said quietly. "Let her go, she's made her choice." Paul stared at him, shocked. "Dad, she's right," he said. "We took too much." My mother turned toward him, disbelief flashing across her face. "You're siding with her?" He set the tablet down. "I'm siding with peace." For a moment no one moved, then I picked up my bag. "I didn't come for revenge," I said. "I came to make sure you understood why I'm not coming back." I walked to the door. Paul's voice followed me, cracked but defiant. "You'll regret this, Colette." I turned, hand on the handle. "Maybe, but at least it'll be my regret." The air outside was cold but clean. I stepped into it, closed the door gently behind me, and walked toward my car. The sun was setting, the sky bruised with gold and violet. I started the engine, but before pulling away, I glanced once at the house. Through the kitchen window, I saw my mother standing still, one hand pressed against the glass. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just watched the light fade behind her until the reflection swallowed everything. Then I drove home. The drive back was long, though the distance hadn't changed. The same highway stretched ahead of me, the same pine trees leaned toward the road, and the same signs flashed by, but everything looked quieter. It wasn't peace. Not yet. It was the silence that follows a truth no one can take back. Halfway through the trip, I stopped at a gas station by the water. The sky had turned the color of pewter, heavy and cold. I stood beside my car and breathed in the air, tasting metal and salt. For a moment, I thought I might cry. Not for them, but for the years I had spent trying to buy their love with compliance. The tears didn't come. They just sat somewhere behind my ribs like rain waiting for permission. When I reached home, the cottage was dark. I left the lights off and went straight to the porch. The sea was hidden by fog, but I could hear it, steady, endless, indifferent. I leaned on the railing, letting the damp air settle on my face. The sound of the waves felt like breathing for me, slow and necessary. Inside, I made tea. The warmth of the mug spread through my hands, pulling me back to the present. I noticed small things. The mint on the windowsill had grown taller, the new glass pane still clear, the smell of lemon polish faint from the day before. Every detail reminded me that this space was real, earned, untouchable. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. I wanted to write something, anything, to anchor the moment before it drifted away. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Words came slowly at first, then all at once. Family is a word we inherit before we understand it. We learn to bend for it, to excuse for it, to bleed quietly for it. But sometimes, love wears the shape of debt, and forgiveness becomes a currency you can no longer afford. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. The words didn't fix anything, but they made the air feel lighter. A sudden knock startled me, 3 short raps followed by silence. My chest tightened. I turned off the lamp and walked slowly to the door. Through the small window, I saw June standing there, her raincoat hood down, her hair frizzed from the humidity. I opened the door. "June, it's late." She smiled gently. "I saw your car lights when you came back, thought you might need company." I wanted to say no, but the kindness in her face softened me. "Come in," I said. She stepped inside, carrying a small paper bag. "I made stew. I always cook too much when it rains." The smell filled the room, thyme, garlic, and something warm like safety. I poured us both tea, and we ate quietly for a while. The sound of the spoon against the bowl was steady, grounding. After a few minutes, she looked at me. "You saw them, didn't you?" I didn't ask how she knew. She had that look of someone who's seen too many storms to be fooled by calm water. "Yes," I said. Her eyes softened. "And?" I stirred my tea slowly. "It wasn't an argument. It was a reckoning." She nodded. "Those don't happen often. When they do, they change everything." We sat in silence again. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small glass ornament, a clear sphere filled with sand and tiny shells. "You can hang this near the window," she said. "It catches light beautifully, reminds you that transparency and strength aren't opposites." I smiled faintly. "You always know the right metaphor." She laughed softly. "That's what age is good for, collecting metaphors that make sense of living." When she left, I walked her to the door. She squeezed my hand before stepping into the night. "You're doing hard work, Colette," she said. "Don't mistake it for loneliness." After she disappeared down the lane, I locked the door and turned off the lights. The moon broke through the fog for the first time that night, silver and sharp. It spilled across the new glass window, across the table, and onto the floor where the old floorboard hid its secret. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything from the kitchen, my mother's silence, Paul's anger, my father's resignation. I thought about how each of them had lived their whole lives trading comfort for control. Maybe that was the only currency they knew. The wind outside rose, pressing against the walls. I closed my eyes and let it fill the room. It didn't sound angry this time. It sounded like release. Before I drifted into sleep, I whispered to no one in particular, "I'm not what they made me." And for the first time, I believed it. The storm came early that week, crawling over the horizon like a bruised sky learning to breathe again. The wind lifted the edge of the sea and pressed it against the glass, leaving thin trails of salt when it fell away. I watched from the porch, wrapped in a sweater, coffee cooling between my palms. The house seemed to brace itself with me, boards creaking under every gust. By the second day, the rain stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the weather itself. I spent the morning rearranging the living room, folding blankets, watering the plants, trying to fill the quiet. But the quiet stayed. It hummed against my thoughts like a memory I couldn't mute. It wasn't until I opened the front door to check the mail that I saw the car. A silver sedan parked at the end of the lane. My pulse stuttered. For a second I told myself it was nothing, a stranger lost, a tourist pulling over. But then the door opened and she stepped out, my mother. She wore her cream coat again, the same one from the first day they came to the cottage. Her hair was pinned neatly, her movements careful, like someone walking on thin ice. I stood frozen at the porch while she looked up the path. "Colette," she called, her voice soft, almost tentative. "I didn't call first because I wasn't sure you'd answer." "You were right," I said. She smiled, small and tired. "May I come in?" I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to say no, to keep this fragile piece untouched. But something in her tone, the exhaustion, the fragile hint of apology made me step aside. She climbed the porch stairs slowly, pausing at the door. Her gaze moved over the small details, the potted mint, the seashell vase, the repaired window. "It's lovely," she murmured. I didn't answer. Inside, she looked smaller than I remembered. She took off her coat, folded it over a chair, and stood there for a moment, searching for something to say. The air felt thick with old ghosts. "I brought you something," she said finally. She opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table. "It's the paperwork from the mortgage. The loan was withdrawn. The bank cleared your name." I looked at it but didn't touch it. "That should have been your first action, not your apology." She flinched slightly, then nodded. "You're right." That startled me more than anything else she could have said. I had never heard my mother admit fault so easily. "I didn't come to argue," she continued. "I came to understand." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Understand what?" Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the afternoon light cut the room into pale shapes. "How we ended up here. How I ended up being someone you needed to escape from." The honesty in her voice cracked something inside me. I had imagined this moment so many times, sharp words, slammed doors, victory. But standing here, all I felt was a quiet ache. I poured us both tea. She wrapped her hands around the cup as if the warmth could hold her together. "When you were little," she said, eyes unfocused, "you used to hide behind the curtains when Paul and I fought. I thought you were afraid of loud voices, so I tried to keep the house quiet. I told myself silence was peace. But I think now that I only taught you how to disappear." I swallowed hard. "You didn't make me disappear, you just never looked." She nodded slowly. "That might be worse." The wind outside lifted again, brushing the chimes against the porch beam. The soft clinking filled the space between us. She reached into her purse once more and took out a small photograph. The edges were frayed, and when she turned it around, I recognized it immediately. The same photograph I had found under the floorboard, the family standing by this very house. My breath caught. "Where did you get that?" "It was in a drawer at home," she said. "Your grandmother gave it to me before she died. She told me to keep it safe. I never understood why." I stared at the image, the woman in the long dress, the same tired pride in her eyes, the faint smile that wasn't quite joy. "I found another copy under the floor," I said. Her eyes widened slightly. "Then maybe this house was meant for us both." I shook my head. "No, it's meant for what comes after." She smiled sadly. "You sound like her." "Like who?" "Your grandmother. She used to say that exact thing. That healing skips a generation, that some of us are born only to survive so the next can live." The words settled in me like slow rain. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The tea cooled, the light shifted. My mother's eyes wandered around the room, the vase, the mint, the curtain swaying slightly in the wind, and then back to me. "Paul's angry," she said quietly. "He feels betrayed." I almost laughed. "He forged my name." "I know," she said, "but he doesn't see it that way. He thinks you've abandoned him." "I did," I said, "for my own sanity." She looked down at her hands. "I used to believe love meant holding on no matter what, but maybe love is knowing when to let go." Something in her voice, that tremor, that surrender, made my throat tight. I wanted to hate her. I had built so much strength from the architecture of that hate, but sitting here, I realized she was no villain. "Just a woman repeating the lessons she'd been given." I said softly, "You could have said this years ago." "I didn't know how," she whispered. "No one ever told me I could." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the chimes harder, as if the house itself wanted to remind us that sound doesn't always mean chaos. Sometimes it means release. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her palm was cold, fragile. "You built a life without us," she said. "That must have taken courage." "It took pain," I replied. "Sometimes they're the same thing," she said. Her words lingered. For the first time, I didn't pull my hand away. We sat there for a while, two women and a half-empty teapot, the quiet moving between us like an old song we had both forgotten the words to. The wind outside had slowed, and the smell of the sea drifted through the open window. The room was still, but something invisible kept shifting, like a tide that had turned without anyone noticing. My mother was the first to speak again. Her voice was low, careful. "There's something I haven't told you about this house, about your grandmother." I waited, hands wrapped around my cup even though the tea had gone cold. "She used to live here," she said. "Before I was born, it was the first place she ever called her own. She bought it with money she hid from her husband, my father. He gambled, drank. She worked quietly, saved coins, and when she finally escaped, she came here. This house was her proof of freedom." She looked around the room, eyes glistening. "When I was young, she told me she wanted to leave it to me, but I didn't want an old cottage by the coast. I wanted cities, light, ambition. I sold the deed after she died." My chest tightened. "You sold her house." "Yes," she said, almost a whisper. "And I used that money to buy the home where you grew up. I thought I was building something better, but maybe I only built another cage." The revelation hit me like a slow-moving wave, quiet but unstoppable. I turned toward the window, staring at the sea beyond the dunes. "So this house," she nodded, "it found its way back. I saw the address on your moving notice and realized what it was. I wanted to tell you that day, but pride stopped me. I was afraid you'd think I came to reclaim it." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You always talked about inheritance as if it was a burden. You never said it could also be a circle. Tears blurred her vision. Your grandmother used to say that every woman in our family leaves something behind for the next one to finish. I broke that chain when I sold her home. You fixed it when you bought it back. For the first time, her words didn't feel like manipulation. They felt like truth. A fragile, trembling truth that had waited decades for a voice. I looked down at the photograph still lying on the table between us, the family on the porch, the woman with tired eyes, my grandmother. I touched the edge of the image with one finger. She wrote on the back, I said quietly, "Keep this safe." My mother's voice cracked. Maybe she meant you. I met her gaze, and something in her expression shifted, the tightness, the control, all of it loosened into something human. She wasn't the woman from my childhood anymore, towering and sharp. She was just a mother who had run out of ways to protect herself. We didn't talk for a while. The sun dipped lower, cutting the room in half light, half shadow. Dust floated between us like slow-moving stars. Finally, I spoke. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "Not the way I was, but I'm not coming back to Spokane, not even for holidays." She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheek. "I know, I just needed to see that you're all right." "I am," I said. "Mostly." She smiled faintly. "That's enough. Wholeness doesn't come all at once." She stood then, slipping her coat over her shoulders. At the door, she paused and looked back. "Your grandmother planted rosemary by the gate," she said. "She said it would keep away the ghosts. Maybe you should do the same." "I already did," I said. For the first time, she laughed, a soft, unsteady sound like the sea touching the shore. "Of course you did." I walked her to the car. The evening air was cool, touched with the scent of salt and pine. She turned to me before getting in. "Thank you for letting me in, even when you didn't have to." I nodded. "Thank you for coming, even when you didn't have the right words." She smiled again, smaller now, but real. "Maybe next time I'll bring the right ones." I watched her drive away until her car disappeared down the curve of the lane. When the sound of the engine faded, I realized I was smiling, not out of joy, but out of release. Something that had been locked for years had quietly unlatched. I went back inside and lit a candle. The flame flickered, reflected in the repaired window like two small suns facing each other. I placed the old photograph beside it, next to June's glass ornament, where the light touched both. Then I sat on the floor, pulled my notebook close, and began to write again, not about pain this time, but about inheritance. About the strange way some homes don't belong to people at all, but to the healing that moves through them. Maybe freedom isn't leaving. Maybe it's returning differently. The past doesn't end, it transforms. Some walls remember fear, others learn peace. I think this house has finally learned peace. Outside, the wind picked up and carried the scent of rosemary from the porch. The chimes whispered once, then stilled. I looked at the candlelight trembling across the glass and whispered to the room, "You're safe now." The house didn't answer, it didn't need to. I knew it was listening. Morning came wrapped in fog. The kind that swallows the horizon and makes the sea sound closer than it is. I woke to that sound, slow, heavy waves folding over themselves, and for a moment I forgot everything. The house, my mother's visit, the photograph on the table. For a few blissful seconds, there was only the hush of water against sand. Then memory returned, quiet but sharp like a knife pressed flat. I made coffee and walked barefoot to the porch. The boards were cool under my feet, damp from the night's mist. Out beyond the dunes, the world looked unfinished, a painting waiting for its next layer of light. The cottage still smelled faintly of my mother's perfume, soft, floral, and strangely nostalgic. I let the scent stay. It didn't sting anymore. It just reminded me of what had changed. I opened the tin box again, the one where I'd placed the old photograph, and studied it in the early light. The woman in the picture, my grandmother, stood with that same unflinching pride, her eyes meeting the camera as if daring the world to look away first. Behind her was the same house, though younger, its paint brighter, its windows unmarred. I traced her outline with my fingertip. "You found your way back," I whispered. "Through me?" There was a knock at the door, light, polite. June. She stood there with a small envelope in her hand. "Morning, love," she said. "The postman left this with me by mistake. It's got your name on it." "Thank you," I said, taking it. The paper was thick, cream-colored with a faint watermark, no return address. June lingered a moment. "Everything all right after yesterday?" I nodded. "She came, we talked." She tilted her head. "Good talk or storm talk?" "Both," I said, and she smiled knowingly. "Well then," she said, adjusting her shawl, "if you need fresh air or company, I'll be in the garden pretending to control weeds." When she left, I sat at the table and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded legal document, a property record. My heart skipped. The name at the top wasn't mine. It was Margaret Elwyn, my grandmother. The document was old, dated 1958, stamped and notarized. Beneath her name was a handwritten note, added years later in fading ink. If found, deliver to my granddaughter. She will know what to do. I sat back in the chair, breath caught in my throat. The signature at the bottom wasn't familiar, but the handwriting above, delicate, looping, careful, was the same one from the back of the photograph. Keep this safe. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. How had it found me now after all these years? My mother had said she sold the house decades ago. Had the buyer kept this record and passed it down? Or had it been waiting here, somewhere in the walls, like a heartbeat I hadn't yet heard? I walked to the corner of the living room where the floorboard had first come loose. My fingers itched with the old curiosity. I knelt and lifted it again. Beneath the dust and wood shavings, the hollow looked the same except for something new, a small leather pouch dark with age. I pulled it out gently and untied the string. Inside was a ring, simple, silver, with a single blue stone dull from years of hiding, and another folded note. For when she is ready to stay, not to run. My throat tightened. It felt like the house itself was answering me, speaking through every layer of family that had lived and lost here. I carried the ring to the window and held it against the light. The stone caught the morning sun, scattering a pale shimmer across the glass, the same hue as the sea beyond. For a moment, I could almost see my grandmother's hands, soil under her nails, turning this ring slowly before hiding it away. I slid it onto my finger. It fit as if it had been waiting for me. That afternoon, I drove to the county record's office. The clerk, a kind older man with silver hair, took the document and examined it closely. "Well, this is a piece of history," he said. "This property used to belong to the Elwyn family, your grandmother, it seems. Sold once, repurchased 3 times. Looks like fate brought it home again." "Repurchased?" I asked. He nodded, pointing at a date near the bottom. "The deed was transferred back to a new owner about a year ago. Cash sale. Anonymous buyer. And then 2 months later it was listed for purchase again, the listing you found, I assume." "Anonymous buyer," he looked at me over his glasses. "Happens more than you'd think. Could be through a trust, could be sentimental." My pulse quickened. "Can you see who handled the sale?" He clicked his mouse a few times, scanning the screen. The intermediary was a woman named Evelyn Marks." My breath caught. That was my mother's maiden name. "She bought it back," I whispered. "Sorry." He asked. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Thank you." I walked out into the afternoon sun, the document clutched against my chest. My mother had repurchased the house before I ever found it. She must have seen the listing, recognized the address, and brought it back into the family. But she hadn't told me. She'd let me believe I'd discovered it on my own. The realization struck like a soft blow, not painful, but disorienting. She hadn't bought it for herself. She bought it for me. All those years of control, manipulation, guilt, and this was how she let go, by giving me the one thing she couldn't keep. When I returned home, the fog had lifted. The sea shimmered under a low sun. I opened the window, letting the wind rush through the house, carrying the scent of rosemary and salt. I took the ring off and set it beside the photograph and the property record. 3 generations, bound by a story of women learning, too late or just in time, how to stay. I whispered into the quiet, "I know what to do now." The words didn't need explaining. The house already understood. The sun dipped low when I reached for the phone. It had been sitting face down on the counter all afternoon, silent and patient. I turned it over, hesitated, then called her. The line clicked once before she answered. "I wondered when you'd find it," my mother said. Her tone wasn't surprised, just tired, as though she'd been living inside this moment long before I arrived at it. "You bought the house?" I said. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have taken it if I had?" The question hung there, sharp as glass. I opened my mouth, but the answer didn't come. I thought of the first day I'd stepped onto this porch, thinking I had chosen freedom. I thought of the scent of paint, the wind in the curtains, the sense of victory that had felt so wholly mine. "You didn't trust me to make my own choices," I said finally. "I trusted you," she said quietly. "I just didn't trust myself to stay out of your way, so I did the only thing I knew how. I made sure you had what my mother once gave me, even if you never knew it came from me." Her voice cracked on the last words. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things she couldn't say without breaking. I walked to the window, the sea glowing silver under the fading light. "You think this fixes it?" "No," she said. "Nothing fixes what we were." But I wanted to end the story where it began. That's the closest thing to forgiveness I could manage. I leaned against the frame, watching the waves roll and recede. "You lied," I said softly, but for once the lie was kind. She exhaled, a sound caught between a sigh and relief. Maybe that's how love looks when you've run out of other languages. I found her ring, I said. There was a long pause. Then, your grandmother, the blue stone? Yes. She wore that every day, my mother said, her voice turning fragile. She said it reminded her that oceans looked peaceful because no one could see how deep they were. I think she wanted us both to remember that. I turned the ring between my fingers, watching the faint light glint off the worn silver. She left it under the floor, for when I was ready to stay, not to run. My mother whispered, "Then I suppose you're ready now." Something inside me loosened, the tight thread that had held years of anger taut. Maybe we both are, I said. The line went quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just a quiet between two shores, water moving slowly in between. Take care of the house, she said at last. It's the only thing in our family that's ever forgiven us. I will, I promised. When we hung up, the room felt lighter. The kind of light that comes after rain, not bright, but honest. I placed the phone down gently and turned toward the table where the photograph, ring, and document waited. The candle I'd left from last night had melted low, a small pool of wax holding its shape around the wick. I took the photograph and slipped it into a wooden frame. Then I hung it by the door where the morning sun would touch it first. The woman in the picture, my grandmother, my mother's mother, seemed to watch the room with quiet pride. I wanted her to see what her house had become. Later that evening, June came by again. She carried a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "You've been quiet today," she said. "That can mean peace or disaster. Which is it?" "Peace," I said, smiling faintly. "For once, it's peace." We drank on the porch as the sky darkened to navy. The wind played with the rosemary by the steps, releasing its sharp scent. I told June the whole story, the letter, the house, the ring, my mother's call. She listened without interrupting, her eyes kind and steady. When I finished, she said softly, "Sometimes people give love the only way they know how. It's messy, but it's still love." "I used to think love had to be clean," I said. "Simple, direct, easy to name, but maybe love's more like this house. You build it, lose it, rebuild it again, and every time it holds a little more truth." June smiled. "Then keep building." After she left, I stayed outside. The moon rose slowly over the water, a pale coin tossed between clouds. I could hear the sea whispering against the rocks, the same rhythm that had carried through generations. I took the ring off and placed it on the porch railing, letting the moonlight touch it. "You were right," I said to no one in particular. "I'm not running anymore." The wind answered, gentle and full of salt. Before going in, I looked once more at the sky, deep, endless, unbroken. For the first time, it didn't make me feel small. It made me feel part of something that had started long before me and would outlast everything I'd ever built. Inside, the candle had gone out, but the scent of rosemary lingered. I turned off the lights, closed the door, and let the house breathe with me in the dark. Some inherit money, some inherit pain. I inherited a house. And inside its walls, I found the courage to stop choosing between them. The sea hummed through the night, steady and forgiving, as if it too had been waiting for this ending. Morning arrived like a soft confession. The sky opened without drama, pale and clean, the kind of blue that makes you believe in gentle things. I woke before the alarm and lay still, listening to the house. Not for trouble, not for footsteps or raised voices or doors that might swing without warning. I listened for the small, steady chorus I had come to love. Pipes settling, the mint leaves tapping the window, the sea speaking in its patient way. The house sounded alive, not alert. There is a difference. I brewed coffee and carried the mug to the porch. The rosemary brushed my wrist as I passed. It smelled like sharp sunlight and memory. I stood at the railing and held the warm cup between both hands. On the lane below, a delivery bike cruised past with a soft whir, and somewhere a radio played a song too old for the morning but somehow perfect for it. I felt like I was standing inside a cleared space, as if the tide had pulled back this far only for me. Today would be small by any grand measure. No big decisions, no storms, no arguments. But I had learned that small days make strong foundations. I planned to hang the framed photograph by the entry, to sweep the porch, to bake something simple, to invite people who were not bound to me by obligation, but by choice. I wanted laughter inside these walls, the kind that arrived without being purchased by apology. By mid-morning, I was in the kitchen with flour on my forearms and the scent of lemon rising from a bowl. The ring sat beside the sink where I could see it catch light. I kept glancing at it as if it might offer instructions. It did not. It only shone again and again as if to say continue. June knocked at 10 with a basket of pears and a set of napkins embroidered with small waves. She kissed my cheek and asked what needed doing. I handed her a knife and pointed at the fruit. We worked in the soft body of a quiet hour, slicing and arranging and humming along to the radio. She told me the mint would try to climb the sill if I let it. I told her I would let it, but only halfway. Around noon, Lydia texted. She wrote that the kids were excited to see the ocean and that she would bring a salad that tasted like summer. The message made my throat warm, not because of the dish, though that helped, because of the trust inside the words. No request hidden in them, no debt implied. Just we are coming if you want us. I replied yes and meant it. Before they arrived, I walked through the rooms and opened every window a little. The sea moved into the house like a guest who had always known the way. I set the vase of shells on the table, placed the glass ornament where it could catch afternoon light, adjusted the photograph by the door so that my grandmother would watch every arrival and departure with the same patient strength she gave to the camera years ago. I told her quietly that we were ready. Lydia's kids came running first, sandals slapping, laughter trailing behind them as if they were kites. They stopped when they reached the threshold, looking up with the serious eyes children reserve for new places. I bent down and told them that inside this house people were kind first and clever second. They nodded as if I had given them a secret map, then sprinted toward the back door because a gull had made an impossible sound. Lydia hugged me longer than greetings require. When she let go, her eyes were bright. She said the drive had been smooth and the sky had been perfect, and that for once she had not worried about being late. I told her there was nothing here that could be late, not anymore. We laughed because the line sounded like a joke, but both of us heard the truth at its center. We set the table together. She asked if I was all right. I said I was more than all right. I said I was balanced. She tilted her head and repeated the word as if tasting it. Balanced. She liked it. I liked it too. It was not a victory word. It was a living word. June arrived behind them with a blue pitcher of water glittering with lemon slices. The three of us moved around each other easily, a dance learned on the spot, not practiced but surprisingly graceful. I have seen families choreograph their days with precision and still stumble constantly. I have seen strangers meet once and move like a river. There is a lesson in that, though I do not know how to teach it. While the pears baked, I slipped outside to the garden edge where the soil was warm and forgiving. I knelt and pressed my thumb into the earth. The rosemary looked pleased with itself, and the mint had already claimed one more inch of sill. I planted a small row of marigolds for the sheer bright audacity of them. The color looked like morning you could touch. When I went back inside, the house was full of the right kind of noise. The children decided the hallway was a racetrack. June pretended not to see them sprint, which is the kindest form of permission. Lydia arranged plates with a care usually reserved for ceremonies. Music from the radio brushed every room with a soft hand. I caught myself standing still in the middle of it all, a spectator at my own life. For years I had waited for Joy to ask for my approval, to fill out a form and present credentials, to prove it would not make a mess. But Joy, when it is honest, makes a glorious mess and invites you to wash the dishes afterward. I decided I could live with that. After lunch, we carried blankets to the yard and lay in the shade, while the children followed a trail of ants with the reverence of scientists. Lydia told me she had found an apartment with a window that faced east, and that every morning she stood there with her coffee and promised herself she would step forward, even if it was only 1 inch. I told her an inch can become a path if you choose it daily. She smiled and said I should put that on the blog. I said maybe I would, but maybe I would keep it just for us. When the sun began to lean toward afternoon, a car eased into the lane and stopped. For a moment my chest tightened out of habit, but the feeling passed like a small cloud. My mother stepped out. She did not wear the cream coat. She wore a simple sweater the color of wet stone and held a paper bag against her hip. Her steps were careful in the grass but not fragile. Lydia looked at me. I nodded. She called to the children and suggested a game that led them, like sparrows, toward the other side of the yard. June busied herself with the pitcher. I walked to the gate. My mother held up the bag as if it were a passport. Inside were biscuits still warm, wrapped in a towel that looked suspiciously like the one from my childhood kitchen. She said she had no appointments today and that she was only passing through, which was the gentlest lie I had ever heard. I opened the gate and told her she could stay as long as the biscuits lasted. She laughed and for a second looked like a girl who did not yet know how to measure herself against anyone else. We stood near the rosemary and the mint and the unreasonably proud marigolds. She glanced toward the porch where the photograph watched over the doorway. She whispered hello to her mother without moving her lips. I saw it. Some part of me that used to live only in defense relaxed by 1 degree. I did not introduce her to everyone at once. I let the house do that work. It carried voices through the windows and braided them together. Eventually, June wandered over and offered my mother water. Lydia came to say the pears were perfect. The children appeared with a shell they had found in the yard, even though the yard was nowhere near the beach, and my mother admired it like a jewel. The moment did not demand a speech. It asked only for decent manners and quiet presence. We all met the requirement. Later, after plates were cleared and glasses were refilled, and a sparrow attempted to claim a crumb with the confidence of a monarch, my mother and I sat on the steps. The air smelled like sugar and pine and forgiveness that had stopped needing an audience. She asked if I wore the ring. I showed her my hand. The stone looked like a slice of sky trapped in silver. She said it suited me. I told her the suit had been tailored by time. We did not talk about what came next. We did not schedule holidays or assign blame an exit interview. We allowed the afternoon to be what it was. Sometimes healing means calling a truce with the calendar. As the light softened, I asked the children if they wanted to hear the story of how houses listen. They gathered at my feet with the solemn attention children grant myths and recipes. I told them that walls remember the tone of our voices, that floors memorize footsteps, that windows learn our habits of looking out or looking in, and that if we are kind to a house, it will teach us how to be kind to ourselves. One of them asked if the house could keep secrets. I said yes, but only the kind that helped. He seemed satisfied with that. When evening came, the lane grew quiet and the blue hour settled its weight onto the porch. June hugged me and left with the promise of more herbs next week. Lydia packed the salad bowl and kissed my cheek and pressed her forehead to mine for a second that said more than speech. The children waved like sailors and shouted promises to return. My mother stood slowly, as if she were testing new legs, and asked if she might come again. I said you may. She heard the difference. She did not ask when. Trust does not need a schedule. After they were gone, I washed the last of the dishes and placed each one on the rack to dry. The kitchen smelled like lemon and clean water. I opened the window and the night entered, quiet and sure. I looked up at the photograph. In the dim light, my grandmother's eyes held the exact edge between stern and soft. I saluted her with a dish towel. She did not salute back, but I took the silence as approval. I blew out the candle on the table and stood for a while in the half-light where the new glass did its simple work of letting the dark be beautiful. The house had a pulse I could feel in my feet. My name, spoken only inside my head, felt correct. I went to bed with the window open to the softest version of the sea. Sleep came easily and without negotiation. Before I drifted under, I thought of the words I would write in the morning. Not a lesson this time, not a manifesto. A list of what I had learned about doors. That some should be closed gently, that some should be left ajar for future light, that the most important one opens inward. The last thing I remember is the rosemary moving in the breeze and the quiet yes the house had taught me to hear. It was not a word. It was a shape the air took when a life finally fit. I slept. The ocean kept breathing. The night forgot to threaten. And the morning, faithful as ever, was already on its way. I woke before dawn. The air was cool and still, the world holding its breath before the first crack of sunlight touched the horizon. From my bed, I could hear the sea stretching awake, the faint push and pull of water against rock. Somewhere, a gull called once and then stopped, as if remembering it was too early for noise. I rose quietly, pulled on a sweater, and padded barefoot through the house. My steps made soft sounds on the floorboards, the kind of gentle rhythm that told me the house had finally accepted me as its keeper. I brewed coffee in the small pot that hissed like an old friend clearing its throat, and when the smell began to fill the kitchen, I opened every window. Cold air slipped through, carrying the scent of salt, rosemary, and new beginnings. I stood by the window that faced east, watching the first ribbon of orange unfold above the sea. The light came slow, deliberate, spreading across the waves like it had nowhere else to be. I sipped my coffee and whispered to no one in particular, "You can come in now." Sun obliged. Its warmth moved gently through the glass, painting the walls gold, touching the photograph by the door. My grandmother's face caught the first light, her eyes turning soft in the glow. I whispered, "We made it," and I could swear the house exhaled with me. Later that morning, I walked down to the shoreline. The sand was cool beneath my feet, damp from the retreating tide. Bits of sea glass glimmered among the shells, green, blue, clear, tiny remnants of what once shattered but had been remade by time. I bent down and picked up a piece the color of the ring I wore. Smooth, perfect. I held it up to the light and it caught the same blue as the stone on my hand. The sea breeze tangled my hair, lifting it across my face. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I imagined my grandmother standing beside me, her apron still dusted with flour, her eyes narrowed toward the horizon. "You built it back," she would say. "You finished what I started." Maybe it was an imagination. Maybe the wind just carried her voice the way it carried everything else that refuses to disappear completely. When I returned to the cottage, the porch was dappled with sunlight. The rosemary shimmered in the breeze, the mint leaves flickered like green tongues, and the marigolds looked indecently happy. The house looked the same as yesterday but felt entirely new, as if it too had been washed clean by morning. I took a sheet of paper and sat at the table, my pen resting between my fingers. For months, I had been writing fragments, notes about silence, forgiveness, walls that remember. Today, for the first time, I wanted to write something whole, something that belonged entirely to this moment. I began with a single line: "Light always returns, but never to the same place twice." Then another: "Forgiveness isn't what you give away, it's what you grow into." I wrote slowly, letting each sentence find its shape. The ink flowed easily, no tremor in my hand, no hesitation. I wrote until the page was full, then signed my name at the bottom, carefully, firmly. For the first time, my signature looked like me, not borrowed, not forged, not half-hidden. The clock ticked softly in the background. Noon light filled the room, clear and steady. I poured myself another cup of coffee and walked out to the porch. The wind brushed my cheek like a promise. From where I stood, I could see the path leading toward the town, the same path my mother had taken when she left that day. I wondered if she would come back soon. I hoped she would, not because I needed her to, but because she now could. There was space for her here, for both of us. I looked down at the ring on my hand. The blue stone caught the sunlight and flared bright, then settled into a soft glow. It reminded me of everything that endures when you stop trying to control it: love, truth, even pain. You just let it exist, and it transforms itself. Inside, the candle on the table had burned low, its wax pooled like melted time. I didn't blow it out. I let it die naturally, the way endings are supposed to happen, quietly, with dignity. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. Lemon pasta with fresh rosemary and a bit of sea salt. I ate on the porch as the light thinned into dusk. The horizon burned with the colors of completion, deep gold fading into violet. I could hear laughter from a house down the lane, and it didn't make me lonely. It just reminded me I was part of the world again. When darkness finally settled, I walked back inside. The photograph by the door gleamed faintly in the last bit of moonlight. My grandmother's face looked softer now, her eyes lighter. For the first time, I understood what she had meant all along when she wrote those words, "Keep this safe." She didn't mean the house. She meant me. I smiled, whispering to the shadows, "I kept it, I promise." Then I turned off the lights, the sea whispering softly through the open window, and for the first time in my life, the dark didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like rest. I closed my eyes and listened. The house was breathing, the wind was humming, and somewhere beyond the waves, morning was already rehearsing its return. And that was enough.